The most painful family breakups don't begin with shouting. They begin with silence. A missed call, a message left on read, a holiday invitation you can't bring yourself to answer. And from the outside, it looks cruel, ungrateful, cold, selfish. But what most people don't see is this. No one cuts off their family overnight. Before the silence, there were years of explaining, years of shrinking, years of being hurt, then told you were too sensitive, years of hoping this time would be different. Until one day, your body understood something your heart was still trying to deny. If I stay close to them, I lose myself. This is the psychology of people who cut off contact with their families. And it is not as simple as anger. It is often survival. And yet, most people who have lived through this will tell you the same thing. They didn't want to talk about it for years. Because there was no language for it that didn't make them sound like the villain. No way to explain the silence without being called cold. No way to describe exhaustion without being called dramatic. This video is about that language. My name is Philex. And yet, most people who have lived through this will tell you the same thing. They didn't want to talk about it for years. Because there was no language for it that didn't make them sound like the villain. No way to explain the silence without being called cold. No way to describe exhaustion without being called dramatic. This video is about that language. My name is Philex, and I spend a lot of time thinking about why people feel, react, and protect themselves in ways that even they don't fully understand. Family estrangement, the decision to cut or reduce contact with a parent, a sibling, or an entire family, is one of the most misunderstood psychological experiences a person can go through. It happens in millions of households, and yet it remains one of society's last great taboos. If you've ever felt like you're carrying a story that no one around you quite gets, I want you to know, you're not alone in that. And if this video helps you see yourself a little more clearly, I hope you'll subscribe and hit like. It helps more people find content like this. But more importantly, stay until the end. Because what I'm about to share isn't just information. It's a mirror. Let's begin. Here's what most people get wrong about family estrangement. They think it's a decision made in anger. A dramatic moment. A door slamming shut. Someone who got upset one day and just disappeared. The parent says, it came out of nowhere. Friends say, but everything seemed fine. And on the surface, it did. Birthdays were celebrated. Holidays were attended. Photos were taken and posted and smiled at. But here's what no one saw underneath. The problem with estrangement is that it almost never begins with a dramatic explosion. It begins with erosion. Slow, quiet, almost invisible to everyone except the person living through it. Think about a river and a stone. You don't see the stone changing in real time. But return to it after a year, after 5 years, after 20, and it's been worn down into something completely different. That's what chronic relational pain does to a person. Psychologists call it microtrauma. Not a single catastrophic event, but hundreds of small ones. The subtle criticism disguised as concern. The boundary that gets pushed just a little further each year. The look that says your feelings are too much. The constant pressure to be who they need you to be, not who you are. Individually, these moments seem minor. Together, they become a psychological climate. And over time, your body starts responding before your mind does. You tense up before the phone rings. You rehearse conversations before family gatherings. You start shrinking parts of yourself just to keep the peace. What you once called family dynamics slowly becomes chronic anxiety woven into the fabric of your daily life. This is the erosion most people never see. Estrangement doesn't happen because someone suddenly stops caring. It happens because they have gradually run out of capacity, out of energy, out of hope, out of the internal space to keep absorbing the same wounds repeatedly. Before the break comes the exhaustion, and before the exhaustion comes years of being slowly worn down. That's the true beginning, not anger, depletion. Now, from outside, the break still looks sudden. And this is what I call the volcano effect. A volcanic eruption looks sudden only to those who weren't paying attention to the pressure building underneath. Lava doesn't appear overnight. It forms quietly, silently, over years. The mountain holds it in until it can't. Family estrangement works the same way. The final argument, the holiday meltdown, the one comment that was just too much, those are never the true cause. They are simply the moment the internal pressure becomes unbearable. The last trigger in a long chain of ignored boundaries, invalidated emotions, and unresolved pain. To the parent, it sounds like, you cut me off because of this. To the adult child, it feels like, no, I'm stepping away because this has been happening for 20 years. The break looked sudden only because the suffering was silent. Estrangement is rarely a reaction. It is a culmination of pressure that could no longer be contained. And once that volcano erupts, everything changes. Long before someone decides to create distance, many have already been living inside a role they never agreed to play. In dysfunctional or narcissistic family systems, identity is not discovered assigned. And those assignments shape a child's entire emotional reality. There is the golden child, the extension of the parent's ego. Praised, protected, idealized. Their purpose is to fulfill the family's narrative of success, even if it means sacrificing who they truly are. Then there is the scapegoat, the one who gets blamed for tensions they didn't create. Ironically, the scapegoat is often the most emotionally aware member of the family, the one who refuses to accept the dysfunction as normal. And because of that, they are the first to be pushed out when they stop absorbing everyone else's shame. There is the invisible child, the one who survives by disappearing, keeping quiet, needing little. They learn early that attention can be dangerous. They grow up skilled at self-reliance, but chronically unsure whether they deserve to exist loudly. And then there is perhaps the heaviest role of all, the parentified children. The child becomes the emotional caretaker for their own parents, the mediator, the peacekeeper, the one carrying responsibilities far too heavy for their age. These children grow up believing love must be earned through service, sacrifice, and silence. None of these roles allow a child to develop a true self. They create patterns of guilt, obligation, and emotional suppression that follow a person well into adulthood. And here's what makes it so painful. When someone finally steps out of the role, when they try to become a whole human instead of a family function, the system resists. It blames. It punishes. Because in families like these, the moment you reclaim yourself is the moment you become a threat. For many, estrangement isn't about leaving the family. It's about escaping the role that was slowly breaking them. Some wounds bleed, others don't. And those are often the ones that shape us the most. Emotional neglect is quiet. It leaves no bruises, no dramatic scenes, no clear moment you can point to and say, that's when it happened. Instead, it is defined entirely by what never happened. The comfort that was never offered, the protection that never came, the curiosity about your inner world that no one ever showed. Growing up without emotional attunement teaches a child something devastating, that their feelings are either too much or not worth noticing. And as adults, these same individuals often become the ones who seem the strongest, the most independent, the least bothered, while carrying a private ache that never fully goes away. I think of it as well. You keep going back to your family, hoping just this once to draw water. Maybe this time they'll listen. Maybe this time they'll ask how you really are. Maybe this time they'll finally meet you at the level you've always reached for. But every visit ends the same. A dry bucket, a hollow chest, a familiar disappointment. Most people don't leave because of what their parents did. They leave because of what their parents could never give. Because returning repeatedly to an empty well eventually becomes a form of self-abandonment. Estrangement, for many, is not about rejecting the family. It is about finally choosing to stop thirsting for a kind of love that was never there. The pain of what happened can be healed. The pain of what never happened takes longer, because you're grieving a version of childhood you never got to live. Now, you might be thinking, if it was that bad, why did they stay for years? Why didn't they just leave sooner? This is one of the most important questions to understand. And the answer lies in two powerful psychological forces, trauma bonding and the hope cycle. Trauma bonding forms when moments of harm become intertwined with moments of warmth. A cutting remark followed by an apology. A cold silence followed by a rare expression of affection. A boundary crossed, then a promise that things will be different this time. The nervous system becomes conditioned to confuse inconsistency with love. You start believing that if you just try harder, give more, stay calmer, stay quieter, you'll finally earn the version of your parents you needed as a child. And that's where the hope cycle takes over. It keeps you waiting. It keeps you forgiving. It keeps you returning to situations that slowly dismantle your sense of self. Hope that isn't the problem. The problem is that the hope is always about who they could be, not who they consistently are. Many adult children stay because they were taught that living makes them disloyal, that protecting themselves makes them selfish. That wanting peace makes them the problem. So they endure. They shrink. They rationalize. They wait for a breakthrough moment that never comes. When someone finally walks away, it's not because they stopped loving their family. It's because they realized the cycle wasn't going to change, and staying meant losing pieces of themselves, one year at a time. Now, when people hear the words no contact, they often imagine a drastic, punishing cutoff, an act of anger or revenge. But distance is rarely a declaration of anger. It is a strategy of survival, and it doesn't always come in one form. Some choose low contact, reducing conversations, shortening visits, keeping topics surface level. It's a way of saying, I still care, but I can't give you the same access to my inner life anymore. Others use what psychologists call the gray rock method, becoming neutral, predictable, unreactive. Not because they're cold, but because reacting is exactly what fuels the old patterns of manipulation, guilt, and conflict. Gray rock isn't cruelty. It's self-protection. And then, after years of trying, some choose no contact entirely. Not because they hate their family, but because every smaller boundary was ignored. No contact becomes the final available tool, the last way to stop the cycle, reclaim mental health, and start rebuilding an identity. Psychologically, choosing distance activates grief, guilt, and relief all at once. You mourn the parent you hoped for. You feel guilty for wanting peace. And you breathe easier when the chaos finally stops. It is a deeply conflicted decision, one made only after every other attempt has already failed. Distance is not rejection. It is clarity. It is the moment someone finally says, I cannot change you, but I can protect myself. Here's what almost no one tells you about estrangement. The hardest part isn't the separation itself. The hardest part is the grief that follows. And it's a very specific, very disorienting kind of grief, called ambiguous loss. Ambiguous loss happens when the person you're grieving is still alive, still posting photos, still attending family dinners, still walking around in the world, yet emotionally unreachable. There is no funeral, no final goodbye, no ritual to help you move forward, just a lingering ache and a question mark where closure should be. You're not only grieving the relationship you lost, you're grieving the relationship you never had, the version of your parent who might have protected you, understood you, or loved you without conditions. And letting go of that imagined parent, the one you wished for your entire childhood, can feel like losing them twice. Then come the holidays, the empty chairs, Christmas mornings that feel too quiet while everyone else seems wrapped in warmth. And you're navigating an invisible grief that no one around you knows how to comfort. But even inside that grief, there is relief. The anxiety is gone. The chaos has stopped. Your nervous system finally exhales. And that relief often comes wrapped in guilt, as if choosing peace makes you disloyal to the people who raise you. This is the emotional cost of freedom, the heartbreak of choosing your well-being over your history. It is not easy. It is not simple. But for many, it is the only way to stop inheriting pain they were never meant to carry. Now, you might be thinking, okay, but is this really that common? Or is this just a modern trend? Here's what the data tells us, and it's more significant than most people realize. Studies estimate that roughly 27% of Americans are currently estranged from a family member. Research from the University of Cambridge found that in most estrangement cases, adult children report it as a last resort, not an impulsive decision. Most had attempted reconciliation multiple times before choosing distance. And the reasons most frequently cited? Emotional abuse, toxic behavior, feeling unseen or consistently invalidated. Not a single dramatic event, but a pattern. Here's what the research also tells us about who tends to initiate estrangement. It is overwhelmingly the person who experienced the most harm, not the most anger. That distinction matters, because it reframes the entire conversation. This is not about people walking away from inconvenience. This is about people walking away from environments that were genuinely damaging their mental health. Now I want to pause here, because I think this needs to be said honestly. Not every estrangement is the result of a toxic family. Some are. But some are also the result of unprocessed trauma being projected onto relationships that were imperfect but not abusive. Some are influenced by outside voices, a partner, a therapist with one perspective, a community that validates disconnection without exploring repair. So, before we go further, I want to ask you something directly. Is the distance you're considering or the distance you've already created, coming from a place of genuine self-protection? Or is it coming from a place of avoidance, of pain that hasn't been fully processed yet, of a wound that could potentially heal with the right support, including honest, hard conversations? There is a difference between a boundary and a wall. A boundary says, I need this to feel safe. A wall says, I will never be hurt again, even if it means never being close to anyone. Both can look identical from the outside. Only you, with real honesty, can tell the difference from the inside. I'm not here to tell you what the right answer is, but I am here to say, make sure the decision is yours, made clearly, and not driven by a fear that hasn't yet been named. Here's where I want to offer you something that most people don't talk about. The scariest part of estrangement is not the act of walking away. It's what you find on the other side of the silence. Because when the noise stops, you are left with yourself. And for many people who grew up in chaotic or emotionally unavailable families, being alone with yourself is the most unfamiliar territory of all. You spent so many years adapting, managing, performing, surviving, that without the family drama to organize your emotional life around, you might not know who you are. The real work of estrangement isn't the break. It's the rebuilding that comes after. And that's where something unexpected begins to emerge. A sense of self that had been buried under years of roles, expectations, and emotional survival strategies. You start asking questions you were never permitted to ask. What do I want? What feels safe for me? What kind of love do I deserve? And for the first time, your answers aren't filtered through fear of judgment or punishment. So, what do you do with all of this? Whether you are considering distance, already in it, or trying to understand it from the outside, here are some things that can genuinely help. First, ask yourself, what is this behavior protecting me from? Not as a rhetorical question, sit with it. Write it down. Because sometimes what looks like estrangement is actually a very logical response to a very specific kind of pain. Second, learn to observe your body. When you are near this person, or even just thinking about them, what happens physically? Does your chest tighten? Do you go quiet? Does your stomach drop? Your nervous system often knows the truth before your conscious mind does. Third, practice distinguishing between peace and numbness. Real peace feels open. It feels like breathing. Emotional numbness feels flat, like something has been switched off. One is healing. The other is a signal that something still needs attention. Fourth, if you are not ready for full estrangement, try a smaller boundary first. You don't have to disappear entirely to protect yourself. Sometimes the first step is simply saying, I need some time before I can respond to that, and meaning it. Fifth, write down what you want, not what you're expected to want. What would a relationship with your family look like if it felt genuinely safe? Write that down. Then ask honestly, is that possible, or is it only something you're hoping for? And finally, whatever you decide, give yourself permission to grieve. You are not broken for needing space. You are not cold for choosing peace. You are not ungrateful for wanting to stop hurting. There is one more thing I want to leave you with. For many people who go through estrangement, something unexpected and quietly beautiful begins to happen on the other side of grief. They discover what psychologists call a family of choice, a partner who truly listens, friends who feel like home, mentors, communities, and connections built on mutual respect, on emotional honesty, on being seen. People who don't love you because of obligation, or DNA, or tradition, but because they see you, value you, and choose you. This is where the cycle breaks. Not when you walk away from the family you were born into, but when you begin building the family your spirit always needs. Reclaiming your identity after years of being assigned a role is an act of courage. Creating a family of choice, one built on warmth rather than obligation, is an act of liberation. And together, they form the foundation of a life no longer defined by pain, but by possibility. In the end, estrangement is not truly about breaking a family apart. It's about redefining what family means. For some people, family is the people who raised them. For others, it becomes the people who finally made them feel safe. Both of those truths can exist at the same time. Walking away doesn't mean you are heartless. It means you stopped walking back into the fire just because someone told you that you were supposed to. It means you chose peace over chaos, clarity over confusion, healing over history. You are allowed to grieve what you lost. You are allowed to grow. You are allowed to build a life shaped not by the wounds you inherited, but by the love you choose, the boundaries you deserve, And in the future, you are finally giving yourself permission to live. You are not broken. You are not ungrateful. You are not cold. You may simply be someone who had to learn how to protect yourself too early, and who is now, slowly, learning what it feels like to be safe. That is not weakness. That is one of the most quietly courageous things a human being can do. If this video made you feel seen, even in a small way, I want to hear from you. Leave a comment below and tell me, what did you recognize about yourself in today's topic? Maybe it's the role you were assigned. Maybe it's the empty well. Maybe it's the hope cycle you've been living inside without ever having a name for it. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear. And if you want to keep exploring these deeper layers of human psychology, subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. Take care of yourself. You deserve to heal.